And we're live? And we're live. All right. Getting ready to start a class in Parshas Terumah, this week's Torah portion. We are doing this class in memory of the tragedy that we had yesterday in Parkland in Florida. Still recovering, still trying to cope. It's not easy. There's been a lot happening. I know as we speak, there's a vigil going on in Miami, in South Florida. Thousands are present, being covered by different news outlets, and it's an opportunity for us to come together, an opportunity for us to realize and to remember that we're one, we're united. Whenever I remember after 9/11, there was a famous personality who came out and he explained that if a few people can come out and destroy 2 buildings in New York City, then we as individuals and change the world in doing so, albeit for the worst. Then each one of us have the power, have the opportunity, have the ability, and have the obligation to change the world for the better. So we can't sit here and do nothing. Everyone talks about doing something. What can we do? What can we change? The simple answer, and I've been saying this most of yesterday and today, is that we have to make this world a better place. The fact that there's still any sort of imbalance between not allowing goodness to prosper, not allowing the world to be completely good, we still have work to do. So in honor of them, in honor of their memory, we're going to study tonight one of the more profound Torah portions. We're in the middle of the book of Exodus, and the discussion this week is about the creation of the tabernacle. God tells the Jewish people in the desert to create a tabernacle, which essentially is a portable dwelling. It is a makeshift temple where literally it was able to be assembled and disassembled in a matter of hours. And oftentimes it was present for sometimes a few days, sometimes many years. But the idea was that God's presence would rest in this portable temple called the Mishkan, a tabernacle. After the Jewish people come to Israel and settle in Jerusalem with King David, King Solomon, this portable tabernacle was then hidden. I actually met someone who claims to have been on an archaeological dig with another guy by the name of Vendell Jones, famous archaeologist, not Jewish, who claimed to have found the place where the temple, where the Mishkan stays. So actually, it was assembled and disassembled as the Jewish people traveled. In their last journey, they assembled the Mishkan and they left it standing in this cave. And they didn't tell anybody where it was. Various hints are left, and according to these archaeologists and historians, they claim to have known exactly where this tabernacle is standing today. And they asked permission. I heard this from a friend of mine, Ephraim Bander, Jeff Bander, who is a good friend of Chabad of Orlando. He went on this dig with this guy, Vendell Jones, the original inspiration for Indiana Jones. Real fascinating guy, passed away a few years ago. And this Vendell asked the Israeli government permission simply to take two drill bits, and to drill into this cave, to send in 2 cameras, and to see if anything's in there, just to see. And the Israeli government said no way, no how, and they revoked his licenses, revoked his ability to dig, and that was the end of that. So, but we are told that when Mashiach comes, we will find the place where the tabernacle is, among many other things we'll talk about tonight. And but it's a real thing. It's an actual edifice that is standing today somewhere in the caves of Israel. And this was the Mishkan, the tabernacle that the Jewish people built in the desert. This is a fascinating idea also according to Jewish tradition, since God, as we know, is infinite. God is God. If God created the heavens and the earth, which itself are incredibly vast in a physical plane, they are physical but greatly vast in terms of the physical plane, how much more so the spiritual worlds, simply put, emotions and ideas, the world of ideas. Imagine how many ideas have ever been thought and then desires, how many dreams have ever been dreamt, and God is the source of all this. So you imagine God is infinite, God is beyond understanding, beyond recognition. At the same time, God tells Moses, I'm going to, and this is the words that are said in the Torah, I will make a sanctuary and I will dwell in them. The Rebbe used to often, Chassidus asked the question, why is it saying them? It should say, I will make a sanctuary and I will dwell in it. And this is the theme of our class tonight, is that when God says, I'm going to dwell in them, He means not only to dwell in the place called the sanctuary, called the Tabernacle, which was later replaced or enhanced or renovated as the Holy Temple of Jerusalem, the first and second. But after that, after the temple was destroyed, the Tabernacle essentially today is every single place which is designated as a place for God. So a synagogue that follows Torah practices is called a temple. It's called a small temple, a mikdash ma'at. And even a house, even your house could become a small temple. How do you make your house a small temple? Making your house a place where divinity rests and where goodness resides and where everything in the house follows a divine order. It may not be perfect. It's an attempt. You do the best you can. But if you show that this is a house which is striving towards godliness, striving towards goodness, and striving towards the potential of a better world, that's called a small temple, a mini temple. And the verse even implies further that not only is a house able to have this level of significance, but so too every single person. A human being, as long as they are channeled towards a higher purpose, a better world, every one of us can become a small temple, a small microcosm of this shining light in the world. That's the lesson of, roll credits. That's the idea. Every single person, God wants to have a dwelling place in the world. What's a dwelling place? A dwelling place really is a place that person feels comfortable. If we feel ourselves comfortable in a certain place in our houses, we act in a way we would never act in public. Why? Because we're not comfortable in public as we are in our own homes, especially when no one's there, right? When we're with our friends, our family, when we're in the comfort of our own closest relationships. So God wants our homes, our lives, to be a place where He can dwell. And there's actually this ironic dichotomy between an infinite God dwelling in a finite place. That seems to be, if God is everywhere, God is infinite, and we are finite, how could an infinite God dwell in a finite place? And the answer, simply put, is that God is not only infinite, He is also finite. So infinite things cannot be finite things cannot be infinite. But God is not either, He is both. We call this in Hebrew, nimna hanimnaot, beyond any limitation. So actually, in the philosophical terms, God is called bilti balgvul, not able to be limited, not limited by finity, by limitations, by physical limitations, and also not limited by spiritual limitations. Something is spiritual, it can't be physical. So it's not limited. God is not limited by either. Which brings us to the question of what is the purpose? What is how does a person achieve a sense of mikdash ma'at? How does a person become a small, miniature sanctuary? The answer is the Torah. A person follows the Torah. A person learns the Torah, as we are doing right now. We become mini sanctuaries for God. A Torah is an incredibly powerful gift that Hashem gave every single one of us, that we can study it. The Torah is completely democratized, which means anyone can study it, could open a book, study, understand. If they don't know the answer, they can talk to a teacher. It's really open. It's open season all year round. That a person can come, literally open a Torah book today on the internet. A person can search Torah True Judaism. Just search it, Chabad.org, something, and learn incredible things that we never know about. A lot of it's interesting. Pick any topic, the Torah has what to say about it. Literally any topic. Sometimes the Torah talks about things we wouldn't even imagine exist or have existed, and nevertheless it's true. There's a beautiful story about Onkelos, was a nephew of Hadrian. And Onkelos was a Roman child, Roman aristocracy, and he wanted to be successful. So he went to his uncle, Hadrian, the Emperor Hadrian, and said, how do I become successful? Give me the secret to wealth. So Hadrian said, and this is recorded in the Talmud, it's not new knowledge, buy low, sell high. Or in his words, he said, find something of incredible value that nobody understands the value of it. Acquire, buy up as much as you can, buy a bunch of supply. Teach people the value. Go on a marketing tour. Teach people how valuable the value of your goods, and then sell all your goods. Anyway, time goes by, and Hadrian hears that his nephew Onkelos converted to Judaism. As a matter of fact, Onkelos' words are in the Chumash, in the Torah books today. Every single Torah portion has the translation in Aramaic of Onkelos. So Hadrian is angry at his nephew. He says, "Listen, I give you success tips to become big in business, and you go and convert to some crazy religion." So, long story short, Onkelos says to his uncle, he says, "I followed your advice to the T. I looked around, and I tried to find something of value. I tried to find, what's valuable in this world that people are overlooking, stepping on. And I find Torah. Torah is incredible. I open up every single book I read, I learn new things, but nobody sees the value of it." How are you? No one sees the value of it. So I learned as much as I can, and actually learning Torah is the greatest gift, because if a person has material wealth, a person has success, a person has money, right? You could lose your success, you could lose your influence, you could lose your money. But if you have knowledge, knowledge is a gift that can never take away, and knowledge is also a gift that you can share with others, and when you share with others, you never lose. It's like a flame. If you take a candle and you light someone else's candle, you now have a candle, and the other person has a candle. So too, when a person acquires Torah, a person studies, they can have it forever and also teach it to others. So Onkelos says to his uncle Hadrian, right, Emperor Hadrian, I followed your advice. I bought the Torah, I acquired the Torah, I learned it, and now I taught the whole world its value, and I'm sharing it. And actually, Onkelos became, as I mentioned, one of the greatest sages of the Jewish people. Not a sage necessarily in Talmudic wisdom. We don't find many stories about Onkelos. I mean, this story itself is pretty profound. But the fact that he's found in every single Chumash, aside Rashi, you have Rashi, which is the simple explanation, and then Onkelos, which actually doubles as a commentary, because essentially every translation is a commentary. You can't have a translation which is not a commentary. If you have 5 words to choose from to translate to your language, if you choose a single word, you're by definition translating it, especially if the words are not exactly equivalent. So a lot of times you could have a language which does not have an equivalent word in the other language. A simple example, by the way, is pure and impure in Hebrew. When we talk about physical goods, let's say olive oil or silver or gold, we talk about pure silver, pure olive oil. The word in Hebrew is zach. Zach means pure, clean of impurities, clean of any discard. In Hebrew, tameh, we translate it as spiritually impure. But it's not an accurate translation, because in the world, there is no such thing as ritual impurity or spiritual impurity. So if a person touches a dead body, there can be impurities in the dead body, toxins, diseases, and so on. That has nothing to do with touching a dead body according to Jewish law, which imbues spiritual impurities, right? For example, if a person is in a morgue, let's say, in other words, they're underneath a dwelling, they have a roof over their heads, and there's no contact between the person and the dead person, the live person and the dead person, there's no impurities, no toxins, okay, maybe airborne, but physically, between one another, there's no touching. If there's no touching, there's no way for the person to get infected. Whereas, spiritually, a person will still become spiritually impure. If they're underneath the same canopy, literally a canopy, then they become impure. The Talmud even talks about if the canopy is 10,000 feet in the air, and it's many, many feet wide, and you happen to be under the same cover, hypothetically, are you impure? So obviously this impurity has nothing to do with physical impurity. So the words have to be translated according to the language they do. So a lot of words in Hebrew have no equivalent in English, especially in biblical Hebrew. So Onkelos gives this translation of the Torah, and he gives it in Aramaic, which was then the language of the time. Just to give an example of who Onkelos was, a great scholar, and his Targum, called the translation of Onkelos, is what it's called, is in every single Chumash, every single Torah book of the 5 books of Moses today. Just interesting person. There's the Mishkan. So we're talking about the Mishkan, the dwelling of the Tabernacle. Tabernacle was this tent, if you want to call it, much more than a tent. What it was essentially was massive beams. The outer layer were these wooden beams made out of cedar wood called shittim wood. Shittim, by the way, in Hebrew comes from the word shtut. Shtut means folly. Folly is stupidity, foolishness. It says that a person only sins when they become foolish, right? A lot of times we think that we're not going to feel bad if we do something wrong, and we do something wrong, and then we feel bad, right? Our conscience hits us. That's called shittim. If we were in our right minds, we would have never done that. A lot of times, as soon as we do something, we do a mistake, right? Before we do it, we don't know it's a mistake, or we convince ourselves it's not a mistake, but then we do it, and we say, that was stupid, I shouldn't have done that. That's the shittim. Our mind becomes hijacked by by the conviction that we're not going to be affected by our actions. So shittim, shtus, also the idea means to be out of your mind in a way. According to Hasidic philosophy, in order to make the world a better place, you have to use this same energy. So the same energy that makes the world crazy bad, right? Makes people do crazy things, like shoot up a school, with the exact same stupidity, and stupidity is not a bad thing, with the same mindlessness, we could become crazy good. When you see rabbis on the street, you ask people if they're Jewish and they want to do lulav and etrog. That's crazy good, right? It doesn't make sense. Today it already became normal. Unfortunately, the same way that some evil things that are crazy became normal, became news, became something we see on a daily basis. The first time it happens, it's shocking. Second time it happens, it's they used to say the first time is a mistake, the second time is a coincidence, the third time is an act of war. Kick someone under a table 3 times. After the third time, there's no excuse anymore. So too, when we do our actions, if we want to make the world good, we have to be crazy on the good side and do things that are, giving out free hugs. I think is like people doing crazy things today. It's not so crazy to see it anymore because we're used to seeing, we're accustomed to seeing a world which is hereditary, which happens over and over and over. So the more things happen, the more normal they become. Do something good that's crazy, the more you do it, the more normal it becomes. If it's bad, it will become normal. If it's good, it will become normal. So we learn from this that the shittim, the beams by which the Mishkan, the Tabernacle stands, by analogy, the beams by which the world stands could either be crazy evil or crazy good. That's a shittim. Interesting, by the way, is where did Jews get cedar wood in the desert? Where'd they get the shittim? I mean, we're talking about massive cedar trees. Cedar trees take hundreds of years to grow. Where'd they come from? So our sages tell us that Jacob, when he came down to Egypt, had a prophecy. The Jewish people would leave Egypt after 400 years and go to Israel. And in the desert, they're going to need beams for this Mishkan. So it says Jacob took these cedar trees, I guess they were small saplings in his days, small trees. He planted them in Egypt, and he told his sons, tell the Jewish people that these big trees are for you, that when you leave Egypt, you should take the trees with you when you leave Egypt. And that's exactly what they did. When Moses came to Egypt, before they left Egypt, they took these massive, they must have been huge. We're talking about each one being 10 cubits high. So we're talking about 15-foot beams, each one about 2 feet, cubed. Huge. And they carried these beams on wagons and such, and they brought them out of Egypt, and they set these things up, these massive beams, and they used to have these sockets, silver sockets, and they put them in the sockets that way it stood, and you had rings on top to connect all the beams, so they shouldn't sway. And on top of the beams, you had tapestries, which were made out of goat skin and sheepskin, and even a skin of a tachash. We don't even know what a tachash is. A tachash was a beautiful, and I promise you the Medrash says this, a beautiful unicorned animal. Had 1 horn, and it appeared onto the scene in the wilderness when the Jewish people were in the desert, and they took the skin, the hide of this animal. It was known to be a beautiful shimmering skin, and they used it as the covering of the tabernacle, and then as soon as the tabernacle was made, this animal disappeared, went extinct or whatever it was. And they never saw the animals unidentified today. So some identify as the unicorn, the one you see in little girls' books in school. But that's what the Midrash says, a unicorn. I don't think it's as ugly as a rhinoceros, but some sort of a unicorned animal with a beautiful close skin. The let's talk about the inside the tabernacle. So what was inside this tabernacle? First of all, there were two rooms: a smaller room in the front and a large room in the main room. It was covered with these tapestries. It says these tapestries are so beautifully woven and so beautifully designed that when you stood inside of this room, when you looked up, you felt like you were looking up at the night sky. It actually says that they even wove these golden buttons into the tapestry so it looked like there were actually stars shining. It was a beautiful, beautiful room to be in. And this was designated only for the Kohanim, for the priests, to be in during the temple service. And they were different things that were done in the temple. No sacrifice was done inside the actual tabernacle. All of these were done outside in the courtyard. In the tabernacle, there were 3 items. There were 4 items, sorry. There was this main room, which had the menorah, the famous menorah that Moses made. Moses made 3 things. The menorah, a showbread table, which was sort of looked like a regular table, but it had 12 shelves, 6 on each side, and it was, in other words, there was the base table, and then 5 shelves on both sides, making 12 places altogether. And each one of these shelves, each one of these spaces, had bread, a wonderful smelling bread, warm and fresh. And actually, they would stay in this showbread table the entire week. It would stay fresh and warm the entire week. It was one of the miracles of the temple. And it also says that we're not allowed to have the showbread table empty at any one point. So they actually put bread into the showbread table, into this table, and then when they want to move bread out for part of the service, they would push a piece in from the other end, and that would push the first piece out. They'd take the first piece. It was as fresh, as warm as it was a week before, and they would use it in the services. And the priest actually says the priest would raise up this warm bread and say, "Look how much God loves you," because one of the miracles was that this bread stayed fresh the whole week. The menorah, unlike the menorah today, which many people call a Chanukiah. Chanukiah literally means a menorah of 8 branches because it's made for Chanukah. The menorah in the temple had 7 branches. And there are many different opinions of what it looked like, but the most prevailing opinion was that the menorah was a diagonally placed menorah, similar to the one that we have in many pictures, and the one that you'll often see in front of Chabad centers around the world. It has the diagonal, since the Torah says it was diagonal. Where the idea of a round menorah came from, there's different opinions, but the primary opinion is that the menorah of Moses was a diagonally based menorah with 7 branches. And actually, when it says that when they used to light all the 7 branches, as they would, the flames of the outer branches would lean in towards the center branch. And we'll talk about what these represent in a moment. The third thing that was in the main room of the tabernacle was a small altar. This was a small altar. It was called the inner altar, the smaller altar, the incense altar. And they used to bring incense on this smaller, essentially it looked like a small little amud, a small little bima. And they had a small little plate there made out of gold. It was a wooden altar made out of gold. Most things in the temple were wood, gold-plated wood. And on it they would burn incense, special incense. There were many ingredients, I think it was 11 ingredients, that were used in the tabernacle service. By the way, just to tie this into modern archaeology, they have since found some of these incense in archaeological digs. So there was a dig a few years back, maybe about 10, 12 years ago, where they found, the same guy, Vendel Jones, found 8 of the 11 spices. They had it scientifically tested, dated, and so on, and they were able to identify 8 of the 11 spices. And they actually gave it, they didn't want to take responsibility for it, so they gave it to a bunch of rabbis in Israel who have it till today. Actually, one of the rabbis who have it is a well-known figure, and they made a special place for them to put it, and they said, we'll leave it for when Mashiach comes. But just to tie back in these ideas, we're finding a lot of these things till today. This was used for incense, mostly on the holidays and Yom Kippur and so on. Inside, then there was a curtain towards the front of this little shul, this little sanctuary, and inside the curtain, which no one was allowed to go except for the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, on the day of Yom Kippur. Okay, the holiest Jew, if you want to call it, the one Jew, went into the holiest room on the holiest day of the year. And inside this room it was an open room. There was nothing there. In the middle, there was a small ark, literally an ark. It was 3.5 feet by about 2 feet in size, not too high, maybe about 2.5 feet high. And inside were none other than the tablets, the luchot, the stone tablets that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. So we know that Moses, when he got the Torah from God, Torah came in 3 stages. The first stage was actual physical tablets with 10 commandments, famous 10 commandments, right? Charlton Heston, the movie. Then Moses taught the Torah based on the 10 commandments. So he went up to the mountain, received an oral tradition from God. God gave him the whole lesson, right? 40-year plan. And over the 40 years, in 40 days he received the Torah, and over the next 40 years he taught the Torah. And towards the end of the 40 years, before Moses passes away, Moses writes 13 Torah scrolls. One for each tribe and one for himself. Okay? And these Torah scrolls became known as the Torah. So interestingly enough, the oral tradition actually preceded the written tradition. People think that first there was the Torah, and then Moses explained the Torah, right? Which sounds, like interpretation. But actually it was the opposite. God taught Moses everything he had to know, like a good teacher. He teaches the whole Torah. At the end of the 40 years, Moses writes down the cliff notes of everything he taught into a book which you now know as the 5 books of Moses. And this 5 books of Moses was a scroll, one long scroll, as we mentioned, 13 different copies, and one of these scrolls was placed into the ark with the tablets. By the way, tablets, just to be clear, are two about 19 by 19 inches tablets, huge stone tablets. First of all, very heavy. And they were placed into, we could talk about the significance and the miraculousness of the tablets themselves, but they were placed into this golden box inside of a wooden box, inside a golden box, and there was a few other things that were placed inside this ark as well. One of the things that was placed inside was the scroll of Moses. So if there was ever a problem with the 12 scrolls, they can be cross-referenced against each other. And if there's ever a problem with those 12, you could always go back to the original text, the original script, which was in the Ark of Moses, which is in the Ark of the Covenant. Is actually till today. Talk about that in a second also. So this Ark was inside the Holy of Holies. On top of the Ark, it was a cover, a golden cover. On top of the Ark, there was these 2 cherubs, keruvim. I don't know if there's a word in English, but these figurines, baby faces, I guess baby bodies as well, look like 2 angelic children, boy and girl, and they had huge wings, and they covered over the ark. So it was reminiscent of the protection that God gives to the Jewish people, and protecting the ark over with the wingspan. Some say it was a 3 or 4 or 5 foot wingspan, huge wings. And this was inside of the Holy of Holies. Fascinatingly enough, we say that this ark, even though it was a physical dimension, did not occupy space. So even though the space, the room itself was, let's say, 20 cubits from one side to the other, let's just say 30 feet, right? And then you had the ark itself, which should occupy 3 feet, right? It was 20 cubits. This occupied 2.5 cubits. You would assume that you had 10 cubits on both sides, and then 2. So if you measure it, you'd have 10, 2, and 10. But in fact, you'd have, if you had 20 feet across, it would be, the 10 cubits would go into the space of the ark. In other words, it would have been, let's say, 8.5, and then the ark, and then the other 8.5. However, it's not how it was. It was 10 cubits from the wall to the side of the ark, and 10 cubits from the side of the ark to the wall. But if you measured from one side of the wall to the other, it was also 20 cubits. So the ark did not take up physical space. And we have a few examples of this later on in the Torah as well, that the physical ark was not a physical entity, in the sense that it did not occupy physical space in the world. And this, even deeper, on a deeper level, this explains, and this really embodies this idea that the ark is in the world but not of the world. It is part of the world, it's inside the physical dimensions of the world, but it is not confined by the world. The same way that the divine presence, God's presence, was inside of the tabernacle, but not limited by the tabernacle. So in the room of the Holy of Holies, there was a complete presence of godliness, which is why a person could not go into the Holy of Holies with his own ego, his own sense of self, and still exist, and still continue to live. The person, you cannot have infinity and a finite entity in the same room, right? However, this room as it was stood, and this ark was in the center of the room. There were many things that the temple was made out of. There was gold, there was silver, there was copper. We can get into the significance of each very simply, by the way, according to Kabbalistic, a little spiritual. Silver represents perfection. The tzaddik, the poor guy who doesn't do anything wrong, or the girl doesn't do anything wrong. The perfect, right? Very few of us are perfect, but there's such a thing of being absolutely perfect in your life. That's represented by silver, pure silver. Silver is white. Silver shines, it reflects, and so on. Copper is a much more cheaper metal, which represents the people who are not perfect, people who are who do things which are not up to par, unrefined, if you will. Gold represents the person who the person who was doing wrong things who became better. So it's a higher level of refinement, which is why gold is the most valuable of all substances. It represents that a person who becomes better, who wasn't always better, actually rises to a higher level than the person who was perfect their entire life. The Baal Tshuva, as it says in the Talmud, rises to a higher level than the tzaddik who is perfect. Those of you who are studying Tanya with us are familiar with these terms, but essentially what it means is that a person who corrects their behavior rises to a higher level than someone who was always on the right path. There were different tapestries and different materials, which we could talk about another time. But we'll. By the way, this is a picture of the ark itself. Not an accurate depiction, but somewhat close enough, right? About what it looked like. We actually, at some point, we had to make in school. I remember years ago we made 3D examples of these. However, we were told that we're not allowed to make, even today, we're not allowed to make exact replicas of what was in the ark. So we had to do certain things differently to not have an exact replica. But remember, we used styrofoam and different paper mache. It was a lot of fun. So there's the ark, and then you have the ark. By the way, represents Torah study. Represents those who study Torah. Actually, there's a lot of symbolism going on in the temple, as you can imagine. There's what each of these 3 or 4 items represent. The ark represents Torah study, and the incense altar represents the kahuna, the priesthood of the Kohanim, who actually brought the incense. The showbread table represented royalty and wealth, and actually it even says that the showbread table was the presence and brought the wealth to the entire world during the time the temple stood. And it even says that in the times of King Solomon, he had 10 tables inside the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, the established temple in Jerusalem. He had 10 of them. And actually in King Solomon's time, there was immense wealth for the Jewish people. And for the world in general, it's called the Golden Era for many reasons. Spiritually, it was wealthy. Physically, it was wealthy. And and also it says that he also had 10 menorahs inside the tabernacle. The menorah, by the way, represents a higher level of Torah wisdom. Like the perfectly righteous people, the ones who teach, the greatest of Torah scholars are called the menorah. And it says there were 10 menorahs also in the temple. And by the way, some people think that the menorah was in the temple to provide light. You got to have some sort of light source. So you have many menorahs, many lanterns, many candelabras. But actually, it says, and this is especially true of the temple in Jerusalem, that the temple itself had light. It provided its own light, shimmering light. So why were there menorahs in the temple? So it's explained that the menorah was there to provide light for the entire world, to provide inspiration, to provide a source of divine morality and divine justice to the world. The world should know that there's a God in the world. And it's actually explained that generally in those days people had windows, and a lot of fortresses, a lot of temples in those days had windows that would close in. So on the outside it was narrow, and the inside it was wide. One of the reasons is to be able to provide light. Light would shine into the room, and also if there were arrows, the arrows would get stuck in the holes and not penetrate in. Although if it was inward, the arrows would actually be able to penetrate. It says that the temple was the opposite. The lights, the inside was narrow and the outside was wide. Number one, because the Jewish people were not afraid of arrows. We're not afraid. God protects the temple and no arrow would ever penetrate. And second of all, it showed that the light of the menorah was designed to inspire the world. We're not here to be inspired, we're here to inspire. And that actually continues still today. When a person makes themselves known as a Jew, even if they don't make themselves known as a Jew, but a Jew has this power to influence. They could use it and they could not use it. They could abuse it in many cases. But our potential, our power, people look up to us, whether we like it or not, and they want to see what's the Jew doing. If the Jew is doing something bad, everyone says, listen, the Jew's doing something bad, so what's expected of us? The nations of the world, if they're not going to be perfect, why should we be perfect? But if the Jewish people are an example to the nations, then the nations look at us and say, you know what, we want to be like them. We want to be like like God's people. There's a nice story it says here about the qualities of a Torah scholar. What's somebody who's looked up to, and somebody who's just, and somebody who's perfect, and somebody who's proper. So the Talmud says, be perfect like Abba Chilkiah. That's the guy's name, Abba Chilkiah. And he was actually a grandchild of a famous sage called Choni Hamagal. Choni Hamagal was known as a very, very pious sage. And he's known, Choni Hamagal literally means Choni, the circle maker. Why was he called the circle maker? Because it was known that whenever he prayed, rain would come. Rain would show up. So one time there was no rain, there was a drought in the land of Israel. And they went to Choni and they said, pray. And he says, I'm not really worthy, you guys can pray as well. And they say, no, we want you to pray. So it says Choni Hamagal made a circle. He drew a circle in the sand, and he stood in the circle, and he said, I will not leave the circle until God brings rain. So it started to drizzle, like drizzling rain. So Choni said, I didn't ask for drizzle, I asked for rain. So it started to pour, like flood. And Choni said, I didn't ask for a flood, I asked for rain. And then it started to rain. And he became known by this story, Choni Hamagal, that in his merit it started to rain. So his grandson, Abba Chilkiah, was known by the same thing. And there was a drought in the land of Israel, and they sent sages, go to Abba Chilkiah's home, and, get him to pray. So they come to Abba Chilkiah's house, he's not there. They asked his wife, where is he? She says he's in the field, he's working. So they go to the field, they find him, and they greet him. They said, Abba Chilkiah, how are you? Good day, sir. And he doesn't respond. So at the end of his work, they're waiting on him to finish his work. Finally, he finishes working, and he says, come. And they follow him. And as they're following him, they see all these strange things he does. So one thing he does is he puts his work clothes. I guess they had two different sets of clothes. A basic clothes, like your rags, what you wore. Then there was your work clothes. And then he had wood with him. I guess wood he bundled up to bring home. So he puts his work clothes on one shoulder and his wood on the other shoulder. So they thought, okay, that's strange. Normally you'd put, protection on your shoulder and then put the wood on top of it. But he didn't do this. Then they see that he's walking barefoot. He's not wearing shoes. He's holding his shoes. But then he comes to a river and he puts his shoes on. And then he goes through the river and takes his shoes off. So he's walking barefoot. Then he comes to a bunch of thorns. And not only is he walking barefoot, but he pulls up his robes so that the thorns shouldn't get in the robes. And they say, yeah, it's hilarious. You should use the robes to protect your feet. And then he comes home and he sees that his wife greets him. And she's beautifully dressed. And he greets her, and then he tells her to go into the house first, and then he goes in behind her. And according to tradition, a man walks into the house first, for many reasons, Kabbalistic and for chivalry and so on, many different reasons. But this is what happens. It's strange. According to Jewish law, a man should walk in first. And then he goes in to eat. And they watching at the table. There's him, his wife, and two sons, an older son and a younger son. The older son, he gives one piece of bread, one piece of food. And the younger son, he gives two. Again, each course gives the older son one portion, the younger son two portions. And they say, if anything, give the older one two and the younger one. He's bigger, he's older, he's more important. But why, or equal, but why the younger one more? And then finally, he says to his wife, the men outside came for us to pray. Let's pray. So they go up to the rooftop. His wife goes to one side, he goes to the other side, and they start to pray for rain. And the rain comes on his wife's side. That's the story. So afterwards, he comes downstairs, and the sage. By the way, he didn't even invite them in to eat. That's another thing they had questioned. So finally, they knock on his door, and they say, "We're here to pray for you to pray for rain." So he says, I don't bring rain, God brings rain. And you see, rain came. So they said, and we know that it's because of your praying that rain came. But now that we're having a conversation, can we ask you some questions? So he says, sure. So they said, could you explain everything you did? And they enumerate all the things that he did strange on the way. So Abba Chilkia explains as follows. He says, the reason why I did not answer you while I'm working is because I'm a hired worker. I'm being paid by the hour. And if I talk to you, I'm wasting time from work. And it's not just. It's not right. The guy pays me by the hour and I can use some of the time to waste my time talking to you guys. Even if it's a few minutes, it's not fair. So I didn't interrupt my work. He says, when it came to my clothes, I have borrowed clothes. I borrowed a dress, borrowed robes from somebody else. And why should I abuse? He gave it to me to wear. He didn't give it to me to hold wooden chunks. So it's not right for me to use his cloak to hold my wood. And when and they said, what about the shoes? So he explained that he only has one pair of shoes. He was a very, very poor person. And he didn't want to ruin his shoes. So he says, my feet, they could become ruined. They can heal themselves also. But shoes don't heal themselves. So I want to save my shoes for when I really need them. For instance, when I go through water, I don't know what I'm stepping on. It could be sharp stones, it could be snakes and scorpions. So I wear shoes when I cross the river. Thorns, same thing. The thorns, when it comes to the cloak, it's going to ruin my cloak. The cloak's not going to heal itself. So I pick my cloak up, my feet will heal themselves. Then they asked him, why is your wife dressed so beautifully? So he says, in order that I shouldn't want to look at anybody else. That should be my sole desire and interest. And they said, how about the walking in? So he said, our sages teach us that a man, that whenever you see strange men, you should always be suspicious. What are they up to? So I told my wife, go inside, I'll protect you. You'll go inside, and then I'll follow in after you. I'll putting him between his wife and these suspicious men. And then when we came to the meal, he said, listen, I'm a very poor guy as well. I don't have food. So it would be improper for me to invite you into my house for dinner when I don't have much. And then they say, what about the sons about eating? So he says that the older son is home the whole day. So he can eat whenever he wants. When we eat down dinner, it's sort of like what do you call it? An affair, an established custom. Yeah, exactly. The family sitting around eating dinner. But the younger son, he was in school all day. He didn't have a chance to eat, so he's actually eating for the first time today since breakfast. So we give him a full meal. And then they said, why did the rain fall on your wife's side? Why is your wife prayers better than yours? So he said that when I give charity, it's a nice line. When I give charity, I only give them money. And the money I have to buy food, and then they have to come home and they have to cook the food. My wife cooks the food for the poor people. So she gives them ready-made food, hot, ready-made food. So therefore, her charity is greater than my charity. There's an interesting story that exemplifies, number one, life is a lot more complicated than it looks. A lot of times we judge people just by looking at them. We see them and they're doing strange things and we say, you must be, either out of your mind or crazy or weird or unsophisticated or unknowledgeable. But then when we ask questions, we want to understand, as these sages did to Rabbi Abba Chilkia, they learn everything has a reason. Everything is, we say in Yiddish, ois gecheshbent, which means it's calculated, it's thought through. It's not random. Nothing's random. A lot of times people come over for a Shabbat dinner, they come to the house. It's very hard to explain everything that goes on here, but I explain everything has a reason. There's nothing in Judaism that's random. No tradition is random. And by the way, useless traditions don't last very long either. It's usually a reason behind it. It can be a good reason or a bad reason, but usually a reason, and that gives us the comfort of knowing why we do things. Number one, when you know why you do things, there's passion behind it. There's enthusiasm. You know why you're doing it. You have a reason. Not that that's the reason why you do it, but it also has different reasons, understandings, levels. Every rabbi says there's many answers to your question, right? The first answer, the simple answer, the microwave answer, the long answer, the long story short, the short story long. But everything has a reason. Everything has mysticism. We actually say in Torah there are 4 levels of study. There's the simple, what you see is what you get. The literal interpretation. Then there's the remez, which is usually a hint. This hints to this, alludes to this. Connection, usually very obvious once you point it out. Then there's drush. Drush means like the backstory, the rest of the story, the midrash, the puts it all together, gives you like a subtext for you to understand everything you're learning. And then you have the sod. The sod is the secret, the mystical teachings. And by the way, it's interesting that Chassidut, the teachings of Chassidus, primarily through the lens of Chabad is the rational teachings of Chassidus, blends these 4. That's the agenda of Chabad is to blend all these four. Chabad means understanding. So to blend the simple, the homiletical, the midrashic, the stories, the background, and the mystical, the esoteric, and we blend it all together and show how they're all actually connected. So everything can be understood on different levels. Everything can be understood on different planes of understanding. And there's so much really here that we didn't get to. But this is a picture, or a supposed picture of the tabernacle, the showbread table. Showbread table, right? The 12 shelves. This is a picture of a circular menorah. There are two opinions, as we mentioned. This is a picture of a circular menorah, and in the menorah itself, by the way, you see that there are cups, there are balls, and there are, what's the third? And flowers, and there were different golden. And by the way, the entire menorah had to be made out of one solid piece of gold. You remember this? Yeah. So every single thing, how did Moses know what to do? How did God show Moses how to make all these different things? The menorah, the showbread table, the incense altar, right? So it says actually God showed him, he gave him a VR, right? Virtual reality, a step inside, Facebook Oculus, and gave him a whole explanation, visual, audio, hologram, laser, whatever it was, and showed him how to build all these things. When it came to the menorah, he showed him a picture, showed him an image, and Moses tried to do it and he couldn't replicate it. So Hashem showed him a second time and he couldn't replicate it. So finally God said to Moses, you take this brick of gold, throw it into the fire, you'll hit the brick of gold, and a menorah will pop out. And that's exactly what happened. So actually the menorah of Moses was actually created by God, which is one of the reasons why, according to our sages, it was never destroyed. It was never destroyed. It was never taken into Roman captivity as the Ark of Titus in Rome tries to depict. As a matter of fact, we know that the Ark of Titus does not depict the actual menorah because it's out of dimension. The actual menorah is about 6 feet high. The menorah they're carrying looks about 3.5, maybe 4 feet. Similarly, as we mentioned, there's a tradition that the menorah was angular, according to the most prominent opinions. So the circular menorah doesn't fit. And also, we just mentioned that King Solomon built many menorahs in the temple. Many menorahs. Just for light. 10 menorahs, it says. And each menorah had 7 branches. So 7 times 10 is 70, representing the 70 nations. That are our job as the chosen peoples to spread out the light of morality and Judaism, of goodness and kindness and justice to the entire world. So the 70 nations of the world. So where did these items go? So there's a tradition. And this is... it's interesting how this tradition is not mentioned more often, but that King Solomon, when he built the temple, King Solomon knew prophetically the temple would be destroyed. You can even say he sensed it, right? He knew this was not going to last forever, because it actually says that there's going to be 3 temples, and he was building the first temple, right? It says God would build the ultimate 3rd temple. So he knew that something's going to happen to this temple, and people are going to capture it, and they're going to take a lot of the vessels, which eventually did happen. So he built secret catacombs, tunnels underneath the temple, inside the Temple Mount, leading in different directions, which are unable to be found. Till today, by the way, the Israeli government will not allow anyone near the Temple Mount to do excavations. Try it. Go to the Temple Mount, start digging with a shovel. Right away, you'll have a police officer come over to you and say, "Buddy, you can't do this." There's even a story about a guy who tried. They started to dig holes near the Temple Mount. I think there was even in Jerusalem. There's a hole somewhere. And as soon as the government found out about it, the whole thing was shut down. And they threatened this guy with huge fines and imprisonment if he continues his work. And obviously they stopped because it's incredibly controversial to dig into the Temple Mount. But we know that there are tunnels down there. We don't know exactly what's down there. But the tradition goes that the king, I think it was Yehoshaphat? I'll look it up. 1 second. King Yoshiyahu, when he sensed that the destruction of the temple was coming near, he took these items. It says he took the Ark of the Covenant, primarily, that's the main thing, the menorah, the incense altar, and the showbread table, and he hid them inside these tunnels. And that's why it actually says that they're waiting here today, and they will be found when Mashiach comes to the third temple. So any Indiana Jones archaeological digs, people in Africa who claim they found the Ark of the Covenant, right? Remember, this guy once came to our shul in Maitland, and he said he saw the tablets. He saw the tablets. So my father very casually says, "What did they look like?" So he says, tablets, the round tablets. I don't think he says round. He just motions like the round. My father right away knew he didn't see no tablets, because tablets, as you know, are not round. There's no source whatsoever that says they're round. Actually, you look at the Torah, it says they were cubed. There's a difference of opinion whether it was both tablets together made a perfect cube. In other words, a cubit by a cubit by a cubit, about 19 inches squared, or if each tablet alone was 19 inches squared. So either it was, I guess, sort of like a half cube or a full cube. But either way, either together they were one cube, or aside they were one cube. But definitely not round. Round doesn't fit. It's a complete myth. I don't know where it comes from. So we happen to have a tradition that the ark was hidden. Not that it went to the Vatican. Not that it was taken into captivity by the Romans or the Greeks or the Babylonians and so on. And what's interesting about this is that if so, what did they have in the second temple? So it says that they built replicas. They had a replica of the ark, a replica of the menorah, of the showbread table, and of the incense altar. In the Holy of Holies, there was no ark. And during the second temple period, there was no ark in the Holy of Holies. It says they built massive cherubs, which were like these figurines, but huge angelic-looking figures out of olive wood, so it says. And it was over a bare space. And actually, this is implicit in the Torah, where it says that in the first temple, they would put it down on, they would put this incense pan on Yom Kippur on the altar, on the actual ark, on the top of the ark, on the golden ark. In the second temple, they put it on the floor. The floor, because there was no ark there, so they put it on the floor at the base of the room. And just to conclude, there's a few interesting things about the temple itself. Number one, by the way, a story first about these hidden chambers is that during the second temple, this is a story in the Talmud, not myth, whatever, fable. In the Talmud, it says there was a Kohen who saw some tiles that were out of place, and he thought, hey, maybe they're the secret passageway into these subterranean tunnels. So he went to get a bunch of his friends, and he started telling them, and before he finished telling them what happened, he passed away. The Talmud says. So, in other words, it's not meant to be found. No one's going to find it prematurely before it's time. And another story is that when these figurines, you can imagine, it says in the Torah, it says in the Ten Commandments, do not make molten images. Actually, it says those words, do not make a molten image. An image of a person, an image of a god, an image of anything. And here, in the Holy of Holies, in the holiest room in the temple, you had these figurines. It sort of sounds, and not only that, but it says that during the second destruction of the second temple, the Romans went into the Holy of Holies and they saw figurines. They started laughing. They said, "These people are they're hypocrites. They tell us not to serve idols, but in the main room of their temple, they have idols." And the simple explanation, which the Talmud explains there, is that yes, it's true that we're not allowed to have idols, but what's an idol? An idol separates us from God. An idol is when we deny God's existence and we try to believe that something else, some other divine power, some other divine energy gives us our sustenance in place of God. So for instance, the worship of money would be a good example. God doesn't give me success. God doesn't give me happiness. My boss is the one I have to, look up to. And if I have to do bad things in order to get, extra money, I have to, lie and be deceitful in order to get more money. That's what I got to do. But if you believe that God's the one who runs the world and God's the one who signs your paychecks every month, regardless of who actually gives it to you in physical form, then you're never going to do anything dishonest or unjust because you know that ultimately God's the one who runs the world. And even if you get fired from your job, there'll be another one lined up and with better pay or something. And God will take care of you. So an idol, simply put, is something which takes you away from God. Here, the idols, unlike the idols, these figurines, the ark and the temple was designed to bring the Jewish people closer to God. And it actually says that when these figurines would change form, they would change direction. That when God was angry at the Jewish people, their faces would be turned away from each other, like these two young infant-looking angels would be turning away, like they don't want to look at each other. Like God doesn't want to look at the Jewish people. The male represented God, the female represented the Jewish people. When the temple was destroyed, it says not only were they facing each other, but they were embracing. And this is symbolic of the fact that when God destroyed the temple, He didn't destroy the temple because He was, upset at the Jewish people and threw them out and divorced them, God forbid, like some of the nations tried to say about the Jewish people. They try to say God rejected the people and therefore, yada. In truth, it's not that God, if you think about it, just a very pure analogy, is if a parent is trying to talk to a child. They're trying to have a relationship, trying to have trying to communicate. And the child is distracted by a cell phone or something. And the parent that keeps on telling the kid, stop playing video games, talk to me. Eventually, what does the parent do? He takes away the video game, he takes away the cell phone, takes away the thing which is a distraction. So the temple became a distraction. The Jewish people were so distracted with the services and the meditations and the sacrifices and all that stuff. God says, I built this so we should be able to have a relationship. Not that you should be able to use it to move away from me. So God actually destroys the temple to say, hey, now what are you going to do? And the Jewish people actually realize they screwed up. And we turn to God as we now know. And today we are at the explanation given is that when we learn to be humble enough to be able to receive the blessings that God offers us and use them for the right purpose, then God will give us back the temple. So today, I could say with positive assurity that we have learned the Jewish people are stronger than ever before. We are more devout than ever before. Even those who are not perfect, a lot of times it's just simply out of ignorance and simply out of not knowing the right thing. And when people find out the right thing to do, they right away do it. One of the things actually we'll just mention quickly is that we were giving a class the other night on Tanya, and we mentioned that there are two types of mitzvot. Mitzvahs that you do, things that you do, positive things, right? To give and to help and to keep Shabbat and to, read from the Torah, all the mitzvot, right? Give charity, put on tefillin. Everyone knows the things you should do. Eat kosher, light candles on Shabbat. There's also a bunch of things we shouldn't do. And a mitzvah is equally something we should do that we do, and something we shouldn't do that we don't do. So by not doing something negative, we're actually performing a mitzvah. So if you want to do something wrong, you want to steal, a few dollars from someone else, and you don't, you overcome that desire, that's called a mitzvah. You're actually serving God in the same way that you would if you gave somebody, gave a poor guy money who really needed it. And this is just simple. In today's, you'd figure people would know this, but not everyone does. More people I went to someone else and said, hey, people don't know that a mitzvah could be a negative action as well. And they said, really? I didn't know that mitzvah could be a negative action. So by doing the things we should do, and by not doing the things we shouldn't do. And by the way, I think America is a very do-it culture. You got to do, love wins, and everything's positive. But we also have to respect wins too. If you respect people, love, everything you do positively for somebody else comes out of love. Everything you don't do negative comes out of respect. The reason why you don't hurt someone is because you respect them. So always helping people could sometimes be destructive, right? Always doing could sometimes be destructive. And always not doing could also be destructive. So you have to know when to do and when to not do. When to perform, when to abstain. This is the way of our Torah. So when we recognize that we all want to reconnect, we all want this world to be a better place. And I think we all recognize that now, that we want the world to be better. We all know how, in a way, to make ourselves better. If we all do one little thing, and this is what Maimonides always says, we should imagine the world as a massive scale, and the world is on the cusp of being good or evil, positive or negative, Messiah or apocalypse. We have the option. We always have every mitzvah we do, every moment, every choice we have is to make the world. Do we want to make the world better? We want to make the world a little darker, lighter or darker. And if we could, and the Rambam says, imagine a massive scale, right? What happens when things get too heavy on one side? They tilt. So the Rambam says that the whole society, the whole creation is like this balanced scale between good and evil. And if we could just tilt it in the side of good, then we'll win the war against negativity, against evil, against everything that is ungodly in the world. And as I mentioned earlier today, on Facebook and social media, that the problem we really have today is not weapons. The problem we have is not the media. The problem we have is not violence. The problem we don't have is not even each other. It's simply understanding and realizing that there's a divine morality in the world, an objective morality, not a subjective morality. War on Live, but I'll still say it's a sensitive subject. But Ted Bundy, in one of his letters, says that the reason why I'm allowed to murder is because I don't believe in God. If there's a God, right, then God could say you can't murder. But since there is no God, he was an atheist. He said, you don't have a right to tell me what to do, because anything you say is your opinion. I have my own opinion. You can do what you want. I can do what I want. That's a world of destruction. That's a world of chaos. That's a Sodom and Gomorrah world, and that's a pre-flood world, which we know is not a sustainable world. But when people do what's right because it's right, it may not be comfortable. A lot of times when you first start doing good things, it's not comfortable. Eventually you start getting used to it. It starts becoming comfortable. It starts becoming new commonplace, and the world becomes accustomed. And today, murder, we still look at it, we say this is horrible. Once upon a time, societies, civilizations, empires, murder was done for sport. Right? In the arenas, you got men and tigers battle it out, battle for the blood, gladiators and so on. Today, everyone recognizes it's immoral. And there's still just pockets of resistance that will not, haven't gotten the message. So we literally have to shout from the rooftops. Rooftops. We have to shout from your windows. You have to go outside, and even in the privacy of your own home, you can get on the internet. And I know they make fun of activism from your own home, but at the same time, it's knowledge, and knowledge doesn't have to be said face to face anymore. As we see, you can get up to your friends in the workplace and your family and people people even your Uber driver, and say, listen, there's as they say in Hebrew, yesh balabayit lebirazu. There's a master to this home. If you walk in the forest and you all of a sudden see a massive mansion with the door wide open, and there's a huge set table with candles lit and food piping hot, no idiot's going to say that, this probably came here and evolved over thousands of years. Obviously, there's a purpose to this. There's a reason why it's here. There's somebody who put it here, and there's somebody who made it ready, and somebody who's about to show up and partake of the food. So too in this world, we recognize that there's so much beauty, there's so much wealth, there's so much happiness that's possible. All we have to do is, number one, open our eyes and see it, and number two, share with others this idea that the world is ready for a revolution of good. We have enough revolutions of evil, enough dictators who came and went. Every ism has been tried, and now the only ism that's left is truism. And truism, unlike other religions try to put it, it's not a rapture, it's not a time of destruction, it's time of rebuilding. And that's why we say, may we live in the rebuilt Jerusalem, which is really the rebuilt world, a world built predicated on truth, on justice, on goodness, on kindness. And that's why the Rebbe said that the message to the world, when CNN came to the Rebbe, the CNN said, what's your message to the world? This is 1990, 1991. The Rebbe said, my message to the world, this is live television, my message to the world is that we should increase in... Mashiach is ready to come. That's what he said. Mashiach is ready to come. All we need to do is increase in acts of goodness and kindness. If we all do that, there'll be no more shootings, God forbid, and there'll be only joy and happiness forever. Shabbat Shalom.